Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chamber Music Mindset. I am your host, Anna Rathbun. I need to remind you before we begin that nothing you hear in this video is investment advice. Everything is for information purposes only. It is for education and is frankly all my opinion, except for some of the numbers. Okay, let's get started with the market update. And then I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the 50-year mortgages, and some information on all of us, the consumers, what we're hearing from some earnings, as well as some of the news from last week that pertain to our wallets. Okay, starting with the market update. Last week, the S&P 500 squeaked out a gain about 12 basis points, so 0.12%. But market performance was mixed. So we had Russell 1000 growth come in at negative 0.12%, and most of that was some sell-off in the tech sector. Remember, I've always said that tech sector is very expensive right now. The valuations are very high. The price compared to the fundamentals of cash flow and earnings is just really in the nosebleed section. So some of that fell. It continued to fall actually Monday and Tuesday, which is today when I'm recording. But who knows if it's going to continue to sell. No one really knows what will happen in the markets. It is completely unpredictable. That's why, a lot of investment advisors don't recommend timing the markets because we all know we can't. No one can. I think there's this idea that managing money is timing the markets. And if you can time it, that it's because you're smart or you have some skills. But the truth is that if you time the market correctly, you were probably lucky. So the markets can move up and up and up and gain momentum, and it can just as well reverse course and fall. And the momentum is not, great for your portfolio. But sometimes when it gains momentum, it continues to go in that direction. It's like a snowball. Russell 2000, which is small companies or small cap stocks, fell 1.79%. So it really had this risk off feel. Now, it wasn't, the whole week wasn't like that. The whole week was, remember, the government reopened Wednesday evening. I think it was Wednesday evening. So leading up to Wednesday, Monday and Tuesday, and partially Wednesday, the markets were happy. Oh, it looks like we're finally reopening. Yay, this is really good news. And, everybody was happy, frankly, that the saga was over. But then, that long-awaited reopening came, and then suddenly the markets got the jitters. And that's sort of how this sell-off that we've been seeing the last, 3.5, almost 4 days began with the government reopening, which is highly ironic. What ended up happening was that the markets thought, well, now that the government is opening, we're going to be getting some data. Remember, we haven't been getting government data on the US economy since the 1st of October, right? So now that we're getting the data, maybe it's not going to be what we think. Maybe it's going to be really weak or not weak as we want it to be for the Fed to continue to cutting rates. And so it really came back to the Federal Reserve and interest rates. And it really began when the government came out and said, they're going to release the labor market report for October, but only the non-farm payroll number. When people say, this month the US economy gained 150,000 jobs, those numbers, they will come out, but the unemployment rate is not going to come out because the government's closed. They only have partial data, right? And I think what happened was then people thought, well, this is creating a blind spot in the economy, and it might not give the Fed enough confidence to be able to cut in December, cut interest rates. And that, of course, markets don't like, right? The markets like the interest rates to cut because it helps to boost asset prices. It brings the borrowing costs down lower for everybody. There's more liquidity, et cetera, et cetera. So lo and behold, government reopening. Now we have to face the facts of what it means to close the government for that long. There's some numbers just are never going to get published. And actually, Fed officials actually came out and they said, well, we may not have the confidence. Several of them came out and said maybe holding is a better option for December. And so, when the expectation is that they will most likely cut in December, but, those expectations are not met, then sometimes you have a disappointment. It's expressed in terms of a sell-off. The fact that it's continuing is not necessarily only related to the Federal Reserve and what it might do next month. Some of this sometimes it's just markets look for a reason to sell off, right? And when that pressure to sell off builds, it builds upon on itself. Okay, so it kind of spirals, and that is what we might be seeing right now. Sometimes when the valuations are super high and investors get a little jittery, they look for a reason to sell. And then the buyers come in. I mean, it's a bit of a game in the markets, when are the buyers going to come in and buy the dip and for the markets to draw a V or for the momentum to stop going downward and to build the momentum back up. And this is what it does, up and down, up and down. It is better to have a strategic asset allocation for what you want out of your life, what you need in your life, and understand your timeline and invest accordingly. Because again, you cannot time the markets, and some of this movement that you're seeing it's the fickle nature of the markets. So that is the market update. Hopefully the buyers will kick in and we will stop this sell-off, hopefully. But again, I don't know the future. All right, in our next segment, we're going to go into 50-year mortgages. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chamber Music Mindset. I am your host, Anna Rathbun. How many of you want to keep paying your mortgage into your retirement? Like a sure thing that you will. I don't. And that's what a 50-year mortgage will most likely do, unless you buy a house when you're 5 years old. And I'm not sure most Americans are in that position to do so. And certainly, no, I don't think so. I don't even think you can borrow money at 5 years old for most people. Okay. 50-year mortgages, I just can't find a redeeming quality. Number one, by the time you're old enough to actually buy a house, which probably means that you have a job. This is most people. Okay. I know there's some people who don't need to have a job to buy a house, but that's not most people. Let's call it mid-20s, 25. You get a 50-year mortgage, you're going to be 75 when you pay it off. Okay. So I don't think I want to be paying off a mortgage at 75. Oops, keep hitting my microphone. The other thing is banks are really positioned to make more money here. I'm not sure if it's going to be helping the homeowners or, would-be homeowners. Because here's the thing, 50 years from now, my current circumstances under which the bank would be doing the assessment of my credit worthiness is going to be irrelevant. You could even argue that it's going to be irrelevant for a 30-year mortgage, right? And now it's going to be even more uncertain because it's 20 years longer than the 30-year mortgage. So in the context of uncertainty, what banks will do is, well, I have to get compensated for it. If I'm going to lend you money for that long, things are so uncertain from my perspective on your ability to pay it back that I actually have to get compensated for that uncertainty. So they're going to charge interest rates that are much higher than the 30-year mortgage, right? So if we bring that down to a monthly payment for most people, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. It might be slightly lower, maybe, but it's not going to be that much different. And now, with a slightly lower mortgage payment, instead of 30 years, you're going to pay it for 50 years. And that doesn't seem that appetizing to me. The other thing is that it's going to take you much longer to build equity in your home. And for most Americans, the house is where most of their wealth is tied to because you get to build equity in it for many, many years, up to 30 right now. And a lot of people have paid off their mortgages and they're sitting in their homes with full ownership. And that is amazing. And that is their wealth. So if it's going to take longer for Americans to build wealth, I don't think that's a good idea either. So I don't really see any redeeming quality to the idea of a 50-year mortgage. I think it's a nice broad idea, but when you get down to the details, I don't think it's worth it. If somebody can think of a positive, they need to let me know because I can't really think of one. Plus, let's take a few steps out and look at the big picture. It's a very expensive Band-Aid that nobody is paying except you. The consumers would be paying. The homeowners, the people who hold those mortgages and need to pay those mortgages, they're the ones paying for this Band-Aid. It doesn't get to the root of the problem. And what is the root of the problem? Interest rates. It's really the root of the problem. I said this in a video maybe when in the first month or so of the lifespan so far of the Chamber Music Mindset, which is that when the pandemic began and the Fed lowered rates to zero, actually it was to zero, mortgage rates went down super duper low, sub 3%. I mean, how often do you see that? You certainly don't see that now anymore, right? And so the housing market was hot. And a lot of people bought homes because they wanted to lock in that really, really historically low mortgage rates. And they did. Now that the interest rates have gone up and the Fed raised it so quickly that there was no chance for the housing market to get caught up and for people to, no, this was like it felt like an overnight change. It took about a year and a half. And that's not a very long time either. People thought, well, good thing I locked it in. And not only that, people refinanced into the lower rates as well. They're sitting on it. Why not? If you don't have to move, and you can, even if you outgrow your house, if you can kind of make do, why in the world would you give that up, right? Which meant that there weren't enough homes coming into the market, right? And supply was constrained. And people were still looking for homes. Sometimes you just have to buy a home. Sometimes you just have to move, right? And they couldn't find homes because the supply was restricted. Prices start to go up. It's a simple supply and demand issue. Supply was restricted, there was more demand, and so prices kept going up. So you have high home prices, and then you have high interest rates. The affordability of homes is just, it's not normal, right? And that's why a housing market is in the doldrums. Now, if housing supply is constrained, we just need more supply, which means we need to build more homes. But construction is also kept at bay because home construction is also done through financing and interest rates are high, right? So the housing market has come to this standstill, which is why, and if you have to move, then you have to assume this really, really high interest rates, right? 7-8% in some cases. People had to buy homes when mortgage rates were that high. So doing this 50-year mortgage thing is just a Band-Aid. It doesn't solve the issue of a gridlocked housing market. You really have to get down to the problem of supply and demand and let the market solve it. But right now, I mean, if you watch this regularly, you know how I feel about interest rates at the moment. I do think it's restrictive. I know a lot of Fed officials and other economists have come out and said, well, it's not that restrictive. If the stock market is hitting record highs, that means there's a lot of liquidity in the system. Maybe there is for some people, right? But for certain industries, it's been gridlocked. Auto loans, anything that you have to finance, it's been very, very difficult, right? And that's where interest rates really hit the ground, right? That's where the rubber hits the road. So, I mean, maybe if you're worried about people, borrowing money on margin and investing in the stock market, I mean, okay, but I mean, they're taking that risk themselves. They're going to take that risk whether the interest rates are high or not, as long as the spread they're earning they're happy with it, right? So I think that the rates are too restrictive for Main Street America, Main Street economy. Again, in my opinion, right? Here is the latest on the housing market in terms of quantitative reports. The National Association of Home Builders releases something called the Housing Market Index every month. This month came in at 38. I'm going to give you some context. In November of 2020, when things were just really hot in the housing market, it was probably too hot, overheated, was at 90. So we're 90 and 38. At least it's not like 0809, where the housing market index went all the way down to the single digits. The lowest was in January of 2009 at 8. Okay, we never want to go down there. That is a terrible, terrible place to be. But 38 isn't great either. 38 is, scraping the bottom since, 0809, we passed it. April of 2020, when the pandemic first hit and everything was frozen, that's when we also hit a bottom in the 30s. Okay, so we're not feeling that great. So the housing market is not doing great, and certainly it impacts all of us, unless you locked in the historically low mortgage rates. Okay, more on consumers. Home Depot reported earnings today or yesterday. It was not a good report. Home Depot missed on earnings expectations for 3 quarters in a row. Okay, and not only that, it reduced its full year outlook on earnings. So it is not, seeing a positive environment. Maybe not as rosy as they thought it was maybe a few quarters ago, or even a quarter ago. Why is that? Home Depot is getting hit on 2 fronts. One is on the housing market, right? I just talked about the housing market and how frozen it is. And then the second thing is on the consumers that are also tightening their belts. Okay, so this report was less about the housing market. It was more about the consumers. I thought it was really interesting that the CFO of Home Depot actually used the term, and this is a quote, a deferral mindset. What the CFO is saying is the consumers, which is us, we have a deferral mindset. We don't need to be doing this right now. I'm going to defer until things get better. I'm going to defer it until I have to do it. I'm going to defer it until we get out of this funk as an economy. There's a deferral mindset, and that is not good. And it shows in the earnings, right? That slow consumer spending also showed up in Chipotle, right? Earnings. The deferral mindset also showed up in McDonald's in some way, shape, or form. When McDonald's lowered prices for its extra value meal, it did a lot better. It actually attracted more customers. I did try I don't know if it was the extra value meal. I was on a long drive and I actually stopped by McDonald's out of curiosity and ordered it. And it is below $10. It's $8. And with tax and some things, it was close to $9. So, compare that to, $15 for fast food, which I think in some restaurants it was. I would take the value meal if I were really looking for value in fast food. So this is they're painting a picture of us, Home Depot. The other thing about Home Depot earnings was that normally, seasonally speaking, people tend to spend more money at Home Depot right in the fall, like third quarter. And that's because during the summer, there are a lot of storms, especially, hurricanes or tornadoes or whatnot. And so whenever there are storms, people tend to go to Home Depot to buy things in order to renovate or fix things. Also, before the winter comes, people tend to do things to winterize their homes. So, if you have to replace your roof at some point, you're not going to do it in January. You're going to do it sometime in the fall or the summer. And usually it's the fall. And what Home Depot said, that deferral mindset is also having people, maybe let's just wait another year, right? This is the psychology of the consumers today. So what's happening? Well, there seems to be an effort to give a little bit of relief to the consumers. So last week we heard about some break on food items from the tariffs that have been implemented. So I think it's like over 200 food items that we're importing from other countries that had a tariff on them. They're going away. There are things like beef, apparently, and I'm reading off of this list, bananas, oranges, and other tropical fruits that we don't actually produce here. Coffee. Oh, I can't believe there was a tariff on coffee. I drink coffee all the time. Coffee, cocoa, black and green tea, ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla beans. I believe really good ones come from Madagascar. Nuts like macadamia and pine nuts, certain chemicals used in food production, et cetera, et cetera. So tariffs are going away on these items. Well, that's a good thing. But I mean, my diet is not made up of the food list items here, right? My diet is also made up of a lot of other things. So I'm not sure what is going to happen, but it's better to take these off than to keep them on, in my opinion. The other thing that has been floating around is something called a tariff dividend. Apparently, the government is right now looking into a potential $2,000 payment. And I think it's a one-time payment to households as sort of like a dividend. Oh, we collected all these tariffs. Now we're going to give it back to the consumers as a dividend. My feeling on this is it's not a dividend because we paid for it mostly. So I guess in some ways it's a rebate, not a dividend. And on top of that, we learned during the pandemic that when you get a windfall payment, I mean, think about it. If this is coming from tariffs of things that we bought, and there was a little bit of tariffs here, a little bit of tariffs here, you don't feel it until it's like a death by 1,000 cuts, right? But if you get a huge lump sum payment, maybe if the economy is really bad, we'll hold on to it and not spend it, but we can spend it. And that's what we learned during the pandemic is that when we got a windfall from the tariff payments, we spent it. And that's like a sugar in the economy, like feeding it sugar. And what happened was with the supply chain disruptions, if you remember that in 2001 and 2002, for a while there was a huge disruption that disrupted also the supply and demand dynamic, right? And that raised prices. And then, of course, we got those payments from the government, and then we spent money. The demand went really high, and then supply was still constrained. That was part of the inflation problem. So I'm not entirely sure why the 2000 payment in tariff dividend is a good idea when the Federal Reserve is already worried about inflation. And that's why they're keeping interest rates on the restrictive side. I just don't think this is a good idea. We did this not too long ago and it didn't work out. It actually caused pain for a lot of people and still is causing pain for a lot of people. This type of monetary, not Federal Reserve monetary, but fiscal stimulus is usually inflationary. So I don't think it's a good idea. So, what will ease, I'm not a policymaker and I'm not an advisor and I'm not a consultant to the government, but my opinion is that the tariffs are really causing a lot of disruptions in the economy. It's making people nervous. It's making business owners nervous. It's making companies nervous. And what that's causing is psychologically, it's causing us to freeze. And when you freeze, the economy slows down. Okay, it's not even that the tariffs are directly causing a recession or a recessionary vibe. It's that our behavior is. But that's how everything works. That's how the economy works. My suggestion would be to let the markets work it out, right? Removing the tariffs would be probably wise so that the markets can find an efficient price for the goods and services. And then that will give people more confidence. But again, I don't think anybody's going to listen to me. And by the way, I'm not the only person who has this opinion. This is a pretty common opinion because that's just how American economy has worked for a long time. All right, that's it for this week. Have a wonderful week. I am recording this on Tuesday, so it will go out sometime Tuesday evening. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week. How many of you want to keep